Judith Hikari. So they were really brutal and horrible, and like I said, it just continued on. But he did continue to taunt people, and he was very, very active, and he was very brazen and very brutal.
Now that's fascinating. Did he, when he gave his confession, did he give a motive for all these crimes?
Did he do what? What was that? I'm sorry.
Oh, when he made his confession, right, and his guilty plea,
right.
Did he give a motive for what his crimes for doing all this?
No, I don't imagine he did. He certainly it wasn't shared with the public. And the other thing that they didn't have him do was admit to any other crimes. They wanted to focus on getting all the ones that he was charged with, which were 13 in different jurisdictions. They wanted this, all buttoned up and finished, and so they did that. But they didn't make him confess to being Zodiac, or they didn't make him confess. They didn't say, hey, what else did you do? How they do with some serial killers. Gee, how many other murders did you commit, and why didn't you fill us in a little bit? They didn't make any kind of arrangement with him to confess to anything other than what they had originally charged him with. And so there's all these other crimes he could have committed, and in most people who sort of track this guy, different sleuths out there, they know he had to be responsible for a lot more death and destruction. And maybe we'll find out eventually. But it's been very quiet since he confessed, and that was in 2020. And we haven't heard really anything. I'm told personally that they are looking into other connections, other murders, etc. They do want to clear them. But we haven't heard, as you know, probably.
Right. So you don't think they've even asked him if he's Zodiac?
They may have, but we don't know.
We don't know.
We won't know.
Okay.
Yeah. They could very well have asked him, but, maybe they made a deal with him to not say anything. I don't know what I have no idea what their deal was. All I know is that they wanted to button up he'd been charged with already. And so I did talk to one of the counties, and I'm not going to name which one, where one of the investigators I was talking to, he said, as far as they're concerned in that particular location, this is a done deal. It's over. It's over with. They're not looking at anything. So it's like, wow.
Yeah, doesn't it fascinate? So many famous cases, the murder, I'm thinking of the dating game killer. He would take these girls back to his mother's house and chop them up and torture them, rape them all night long. And the mother's never charged. No one, she didn't know this was going on. It's impossible, Yeah. And you see that so often.
It's insane how much he did, and I finally said in this most recent book, because I've been very careful about what I say.
Yeah.
Somebody had to know. There were burglaries or other crimes that were committed that he had to have an accomplice, and if somebody knew, they're either dead now or they're, they'll never talk. I don't know if they knew he was a killer. Probably they did. Whoever his accomplices might have been, or whoever was out there that helped him in some of the burglaries. And I'm not the only one who thinks that. There's law enforcement who thought that as well, that he had an accomplice some of the time. But I don't think he had an accomplice to murder. I think that that was his own thing. That's something he wanted to do from an early age. So.
Now, one of the things that the Zodiac is famous for is the ciphers and the code and all that kind of stuff. Did D'Angelo, did he have any kind of experience or history of working with those kind of codes?
Well, what's interesting is he was in the Navy, so he had some knowledge of ciphers and radians, for that matter. He had a mechanical background as well. He worked at the Save Mart there, working on trucks, etc., for years and years until he retired. But he did have experience in the Navy with ciphers. So, one of the things that was discovered in the last couple of years, too, I have a friend, Dirt Poor Richard, you probably heard me talk about him if you've listened to my interviews, is he solved the 340 cipher. And then, but he didn't get the media attention that the group that said they solved it last year did. And but he can prove how he solved it versus them, who I don't know if they can prove it. So anyway, what's inside some of these messages is there's a million misspelled words in the ciphers. And when you look at the misspelled words, you go, God, how come he misspelled so many words? It's just really stupid misspellings. Well, the fact is that they're misspelled on purpose, and within those misspelled words, there's a whole different message. So there's hidden messages within the messages, which we are now just deciphering. And Richard is actually writing a book now, so about what he's discovered. So that'll be interesting to see what he comes up with. But my books also, the last couple, have his solved. They show how he solved it, so they are in my books as well, with his permission. He and I talked just on New Year's, actually. So there's more to come when it comes to deciphering his different things that he wrote over the years.
We've got about 10 minutes left, and you were telling me before we started the interview that you had some material you wanted to read to us.
Well, it's just basically what I told you about Dorothy Scott, but there were other things like in 1970-71 where the law enforcement discussed that maybe it was Zodiac in Sacramento, and the similarities in the crimes that occurred, not just in Sacramento, but in the Bay Area. I mean, there were things that he did where he would actually hide, and he would be in a remote home, like, for example, he would go into a house that he would find, in the Offerman Manning murders, he was a lot of prowlings, a lot of things were going on, and there was actually disturbances in homes that were empty. Same thing happened with the murder, Manuela with Hewen, where there was an empty home where he could watch her house. There were times where he liked to watch from when he killed somebody or he attacked somebody, where he would stay in the area and watch. He liked to watch to see the scurrying around and the craziness that went on after he committed crime. And so with the Paul Stein murder, I talk about in the book whether or not he stayed in the area in the park. Like he said, all you had to do was wait for me to come out. That's one of the things the Zodiac said. Well, was he really in the park? So I go through the whole scenario of whether he waited in the park and how he might have done that versus did he leave and how did he leave? Which way did he go? And so I talk about that. And but he, as the Zodiac, he very well may have sat in the park and waited for them to go with dog repellent on him. We don't really know exactly what happened. We have never caught him.
I never even dreamed of dog repellent. That's fascinating. Now, one of the Zodiac victims, there was this speculation there was a cult or witchcraft involved. Does this D'Angelo have any kind of connections to the occult or witchcraft or any kind of satanic cults maybe?
Well, what's interesting is there were some crimes that were committed down in the Vallejo area where around the holidays, around December,
right.
Where they found dead animals, dead cats and stuff, and there were different satanic things written and left behind, And so maybe that was part of what he tried to do to make it look like it was a different kind of killer or whatever. But, yeah, there were different crimes that were happening around the same areas with satanic-type overtones. So, could have been part of his ability to try to look like he did something, like he was a different guy.
And you think there was a lot of that, of him trying to throw people off the trail? That was his focus?
Yeah, for sure. And one of the other things, too, how Zodiac said he was going to try to make some stuff look like accidents and so on. I mean,
right.
I think that D'Angelo was an arsonist as well. He liked to burn out houses or cars or whatever. And the Zodiac did that with Kathleen Johns, where, you find her car burned out after she tried to abduct her, etc. So, one of the other things he did, in my opinion, is he hit people with cars, literally. There's one guy who actually lived long enough to tell the police that he was run over by a car, and then the guy thought he was still alive, so he came back and ran him over again. And then he died later at the hospital. So there were incidences in Sacramento where this occurred as well. If you make something look like a fake accident, there was a poor lady in Yosemite who they found her body at the bottom of a cliff, but she was seen talking to a young man in the parking lot prior to disappearing, and then they find her body at the bottom of the cliff. So there's just so much stuff that went on. Like I said, it was he could kill people left, right, and sideways.
Now, these hit and runs you're talking about, did he confess to these?
I'm certain he didn't.
Okay.
Like I said, these are just crimes that look through the news archives in the state of California, and you can see, patterns with dates, areas, the geography, the way that people were killed. It was, that's why I call it serial slaughter, because even if some of these crimes in these books are not him, and I'm certain there are some that I've mentioned that are not him, he could not have killed every person in the state of California over all those decades. But there were so many murders of women and girls that, some of them were him. And so what I've called attention to is that not enough was done at the time to try to stop him. And part of the reason is the times that it was, rapes were not taken as seriously. A lot of times they weren't prosecuted unless the female knew who the perpetrator was. So if it was a random stranger, it never got prosecuted. We had rape kits that were not tested. So, not enough was done, and that's why I call it serial slaughter, because women were collateral damage in what was going on, and not enough happened to capture this particular monster.
Anne Penn, is there anything I haven't asked you that you want the audience to know in the last couple of minutes?
Well, it's such an extensive case, it's hard to say. There's just so much. And like I said, he loves Contra Costa County, which is where Walnut Creek was, the Mount Diablo, the devil, stuff people talk about with Zodiac, Sacramento County, Tulare County. The whole story leads you back to Tulare County over and over and over. And so if I want to say anything at all, it's that the connections to Zodiac, Joseph D'Angelo, it can be found in Tulare County. Paul Stine was born in Exeter, California. His family was there for 65 years or more. Mark Stine, who is his nephew, grew up there for 20 years. There's a connection, and there's a connection, and there's a connection. And so, it might be just a huge coincidence, but how many coincidences can you have and have it not be real? You know what I mean?
I know what you mean.
Yeah, so it's sort of like, Paul Stine was born in Exeter, and his family lived in Tulare County in Visalia. Wow, what are the chances? And they had a bar out off the highway out there. The Basankos lived down there. Wow, the Basankos were D'Angelo's mother was married to Jack Basanko. And when you look at Grass Valley, for example, up near Auburn, who's in Grass Valley, well, there's some murder victims' families that lived there. That, and Percy Basanko was Jack Basanko's father, and, Grass Valley is just down the road from Auburn. And so there's all these geographical connections with families, and people who were murdered. And so it's an interesting, huge, connected story.
Been talking to Anne Penn, author of the book. The latest book is called Serial Slaughter, Zodiac Killer. The one previous to that is Endgame, The Most Dangerous Game, Golden State Killer. And I had her on the show last time. We're talking about what if Golden State Killer Zodiac solved. And I'm going to replay that show tonight as a repeat. So if you're listening to this on Friday night, take a look for that show. You just Google Spreaker, Opperman, what if Golden State Killer, because there's a lot of content in that first show too, and it turns out she's right. So it kind of warrants repeating. You could find our guest Anne Penn at Anne Penn 13 on Twitter and AnnePennWordPress.com. Anne, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Ed. I appreciate it.
No, thank you for reaching out. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Good night.
Absolutely. Good night.